And now I will go on to a bit of my teachings for today, continuing some of my themes from the past couple of weeks, which have been bringing down teachings from my Wednesday night Managing Ego States class and applying them to a few lines of the Parsha. Of course, we are in Torah portion Tetzaveh, and I will go to the very beginning of Tetzaveh in just a moment. If you want to cue it up in your text, it's Exodus chapter 27, verse 20. Exodus chapter 27, verse 20. So what is a major theme? I spoke about this a bit last night of the managing ego states. Managing ego states is a technical term for what I consider the second most profound dimension of human transformation. And by human transformation, I mean something like this. A person comes to the realization that their current state as a human being, number one, causes suffering, either to others or to yourself. And secondly, is not fulfilling your potential as a human being. We somehow are able to understand that the shape of our thoughts, feelings, emotions, speech, and behavior causes misery to ourselves, misery to others, and we are actually able to change. So that's the theory in mind. We human beings have the capacity for inner life transformation and interpersonal transformation that we would normally call moral transformation, meaning how we affect other people. The connection between moral transformation and inner life transformation we call character, meaning how you comport yourself in the world, both from an inner life perspective and an interpersonal perspective. So the idea of managing ego states is the technology, the second most important technology for human transformation. What is the first most important technology for human transformation? The most important technology for human transformation is not a technique, not a list, not rules. Anything that has more than, in my mind, more than one word is already a second level teaching. The most important word for human transformation is one word in my mind, and that is the word decision. You can read lists of life. You can read technique for transformation. There's new books out all the time on changing habits. I read a few of them. Many have the feel that they're actually written by AI. I'm not sure if that's good or bad. But I read them, and they're filled with instruction sheets and appendices and all kinds of wonderful teachings. You know, I can finish them in about 2 hours. I borrow from them from the library, so I don't have to keep paying for them. And within 2 days, I actually forget everything that's said because they all merge into one kind of big stew after a while. And I don't think any of them say as decisively as I'm going to say to you, which, of course, in my book that I'm rewriting, I'm putting a lot of emphasis here, is you have to make a decision. Now, a decision means something that is deep, profound. It goes into the deepest parts of your souls. It encompasses your mind. It takes all of your energy up. That everything that's going to happen next is based on the decision that you will now make. You have to review the decision constantly. You have to fund the decision continuously the rest of your life with the will and with skill. None of it makes a difference if you haven't decided. Now, you can decide a few things in my mind. The first thing you decide is virtue, which means you act with moral character. You will not do things that cause any kind of harm to another person, unnecessarily, obviously, nor will you do things that are likely to impair a relationship. The greatest things that we do to harm other people are criticizing, complaining, harsh language, escalating conflict. The worst habit that we have that brings ruination to relationships, which is ongoing, a kind of addictive defensiveness. Both they're bad for ourselves, bad for each other, and bad for relationships. Why do people do it? Why do people, even though they know better, why do they engage in criticizing other people, meaning pointing out flaws in an unkind, non-productive way, engaging in hold on a second, losing the term, unsolicited advice, complaining about others, which is a close cousin of criticism, using harsh language. Over and over again, I counsel people, I teach it in my classes, and people do it anyway. The main people who do it anyway is, in my mind, they haven't decided. Now, people say, yes, I decided, but I forgot. Or yes, I decided, but I was weak. What I want to share with you is that when a person says, yes, I decided, but I forgot, or yes, I decided, but I was weak, to me means they actually haven't decided. Now, the decision has to be such that in another context where someone could punish you, where you would suffer unbearable consequences, unbearable physical consequences, a person might then decide. Now, I hope you never are in a situation where if you have broken the rules, you will suffer physical consequences of such a sort that you'll never break the rule again. If you've ever been in a strict military organization or maybe on a football team or something like that, where people give out corporal punishment readily, people learn very quickly to either stay in the program or just be willing to suffer unnecessarily. Now, so having been in a very disciplined military organization, I remember when we were given an order and the heaped on very painful physical consequences if you broke the order. I think one by one, the privates in platoon 3077 said, I hereby decide not to break that order. Now, we were punished anyway, but if you violated an order, it was an entirely different order of punishment. And I remember thinking to myself, we can decide anything if the consequences are enough. So when a person says, I've decided, but I don't live by my decision, thought goes into my mind, is because the consequences are not severe enough. I hope that doesn't sound too brutally honest, but I think it's mostly true. So therefore, if you decided something moral, which means not to harm others, quasi-moral, meaning not to harm your relationship, or what I'll call spiritual, causing harm to the self, if you've decided and you break it, it means the consequences are not severe and immediate. That seems obvious to me. So what is in place of severe and immediate external consequences, what does one there have instead? Which is why human growth, human transformation is so much more difficult than living in any kind of a regime with an externally imposed discipline, because it all has to come from within. I don't recommend that we punish ourselves. I don't think that's a good idea. But there has to be some kind of internal mechanism where that when you decide, it's as if there are severe external consequences. You don't need them. We ought not punish ourselves. But the decision ought to have the feel that of an oath. I'm taking an oath. I will not violate this decision. Now, once you take the oath, then to say I forgot or I was weak has a kind of a paltry a feel to it. When you take an oath, you don't say I forgot. You don't say I was weak. You have to admit to the fact that there's a force inside of you that is deciding opposite. And I think this is one of the greatest realizations any person on a spiritual search can have, that there's an oppositional force inside of us that when you make the oath, it's also making an oath. You make the oath not to, it's making the oath, yes, you will. Meaning you are the battleground between your conscious, spiritual, moral decision and that which we call the Yetzer Hara, the destructive shape, is making a contrary oath that you will not keep your oath. From my perspective, the bad or evil is not just the absence of the good. In my mind, the bad or evil responds to the good and actively seeks to demolish the good, to destroy the good. You make a decision for the good, it makes a decision to actually shipwreck you and make sure you can't make any progress. Now remember, for some people the problem is anger. For other people it's appeasing others. Some people have a tough time not being bossy. Other people have a tough time drawing boundaries. So it's not that the drives of the unconscious ego self, the Yetzer Hara, are always aggressive. Sometimes we make a decision to ourselves that you're going to speak up to yourself, you're going to stop trying to appease others, to please others. being too nice, be courageous instead. And your Yetzer Hara says, no, we're just going to keep appeasing others. We're just going to keep seeking reconciliation, even when we should be drawing lines. There's no predictable energy of the Yetzer Hara other than it functions against your decision. So again, in my mind, the most important thing we can do when we decide, when we want to transform, is make a decision that I will transform. We have an understanding of our character, of our interpersonal behavior, whether it's aggressive or defensive, whether it's based on anger or fear. We look at our inner life, the things we're plagued in the inner world, anxiety, fear, shame, guilt, etc. You make a decision, I'm going to minimize that. Once you make the decision, then you will do whatever it takes. And whatever it takes is the will and the skill. So this, for me, is the most economical way I can describe the process of human transformation, is you have to have some kind of vision, what you ought to become. What kind of person do you will yourself to become, both interpersonally and inner life? Have a pretty clear sense of it, and at a certain point in your life, you make the decision, you take the oath. What's going to happen is your Yetzer Hara is going to be motivated to destroy your oath. That's what's going to happen next. So therefore, when you make the decision, know that you have created an inner life enemy. In fact, the harder the decision, the harder it tries. When you make the decision, life gets worse, not better, because the more you try to live up to your decision, the more the Yetzer Hara is going to try to shipwreck your decision and make sure you are not able to get into the home port that you seek. So no, when you make the decision, you've created an inner life enemy, a nemesis, as it were. The more you try to live up to your decision, the more you can see the inner life nemesis. If you never make a decision, you'll never see the nemesis because it's lurking in the background. When you make a decision and you make an oath decision, whatever it is, to combat a feeling, a thought, the way you speak, behave, whatever it is, when you decide, it decides in a contrary way. And then the sad news is the oath will fail. I don't think there's any human being ever that has made an oath as far as your comportment with other people and your inner comportment, that the oath solves the problem, because the oath cannot stand up to the power of the Yetzer Hara. Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't decide. It doesn't mean you shouldn't take the oath. But by definition, almost, you don't have enough training to fight the clever power of the Yetzer Hara. So then you are in for what I've often described as the fight of your life and the fight for your life. Now you are in for the spiritual warriorship of the higher self managing the unconscious ego self. I'll say that as economically as I can. Therefore, managing ego states. So managing ego states is a technical way of saying, become the human being you will yourself to become. Become the human being that you can see yourself becoming. Become the human being in spite of the tenacity and the power of the Yetzer Hara. Managing ego states is technically correct, but it doesn't actually express the amount of suffering that you'll experience, the amount of will that's required, and the amount of skill that is required. So I wish I had a better term than managing ego states, one that would actually capture the spiritual warriorship that it requires, but I'm going to continue with the technical term. Now, what I've been doing the past few Shabbatot is sharing with you some of the things that have come out of that class, but I want to start with a few minutes that I have left on something from our Parsha. Now, you've read the Parsha or read Rabbi Manning's beautiful introduction last night about the vestments of Aaron and how Moshe is shining a light on his brother Aaron as Aaron is dressed in the priestly finery. There are so many ways that when you read this Parsha, you're just entranced by the beauty. For example, when I read the stones of the Choshen Mishpat, of the breastplate, I mean, it's really dazzling and it's luminous. But there's a preface to our Parsha that I want you all to know, and that's in the book of Exodus chapter 27, verse 20. It says the following: Ve'ata titzaveh et bnei Yisrael, and you, Moses, will command the children of Israel, Va'ikechu elecha shemen zayit zach, they will take to you shemen zayit zach, pure olive oil, katit lamaor, ground down so that it can be used for lighting a candle. Leha'alot ner tamid, to offer up a continuous light. So olive oil, ground down, utterly purified, so that it can be put as oil into a lamp, put a wick in it, and it's going to burn, and it's going to burn continuously, which means it'll burn. We replenish the oil, it continues to burn, and as it were, ongoing or eternal light. Now, in the Hasidic tradition, they say, in Sfat Emet talk for today, in many ways, this is the most important metaphor in the entire Torah. The most important metaphor in the entire Torah, and it was brilliant by the rabbis who divide up our Torah portions to put this in front of all of the priestly garbs and garments and finery, that the point of the garments and finery was to reflect beauty. Clearly, in the divine mind, there's something that we would call an idea or a form called tiferet, called beauty. The priestly garments, the gemstones are all supposed to create in us the experience of beauty. But from the Hasidic perspective, beauty is a way in which the light is shown toward us, and then our being able to phenomenologically experience the beauty in some way feeds our souls. So the idea of creating the beautiful vestments of the priest, the beauty of the Mishkan, beauty is an essential part of the biblical tradition, especially as it applies to the holy temple, the priest, the music, etc. Sadly, beauty wasn't enough, because we know from the other parts of our tradition, no matter how much beauty we have in the songs, no matter how much beauty we have in the Mishkan, in the temple later, no matter how much beauty we have in the priestly garments, the people sin anyway. We would hope that the beauty and the light behind it that shines into the soul of the human being would make us impervious to the dark forces within us that want us to act in ways that are contrary, inimical to the beauty. And so here we are stuck in the core of the human condition. There is enough beauty. And I think in our lives, as you know, for me at least, the most of the beauty that I experience is in the study of text, our holy text, poetry, etc. The beauty of music, the beauty in the fine arts, etc. For me, it's mostly textual and musical. No matter how much beauty I experience, no matter how much I encounter the phenomenon of beauty, it doesn't root out within me the darkness that is lurking about in my inner life. Beauty doesn't do enough. So the beauty, as powerful it is, doesn't produce enough light to conquer the inner darkness or the darkness in the world. It's important, it's essential, but it is not sufficient. So how then do we produce the light that can actually conquer the darkness? The original theme of Genesis chapter 1, that when Elohim began to create the world, in the background was a pre-existent chaos, a pre-existent tohu vavohu, a pre-existent darkness. And even though Elohim creates light, the light does actually not conquer the darkness. Metaphorically, it comes back every night. But on the other hand, as we've discussed many times, the tohu vavohu, the chaos which preceded the universe, that God did not create, it seems to be there as a context, it simply goes in and burrows into the inner lives of human beings. The tohu vavohu is not obliterated by the light. The tohu vavohu, the unformed chaos, goes into the human being, and now the light of the divine, as it were, is asserting itself in a different form, not in the cosmos, but in the nomos, in the inner life of the human being. Now the question is, how then do we take this light, let's say the light of creation, and apply it to the tohu vavohu, the disorder within? Here's what Sfat Emet says. He says, the first thing is, there has to be mitzvahs. The idea of the ner mitzvah v'torah or. The light is a mitzvah, and the Torah is light. Ner mitzvah, the lamp is a mitzvah. Torah or, the Torah is a kind of a light. Now, why does there need to be a mitzvah? And when I say mitzvah, I'll even say things such as what I will call the various spiritual and moral duties in the wisdom that I teach. Think of them as mitzvahs. no criticizing, complaining, etc. It sounds a bit banal until you try it. When I say to people, no criticizing, no defensiveness. Yeah, I already knew that. I said, okay, give it a try. Tell me what you come up with. And of course, people are not able to do it because the mitzvah is set against the darkness. And when you set a mitzvah against darkness, the darkness reacts. The darkness attacks. So Savat Met teaches all light needs a vessel. All light needs a practice. All light needs something for it to channel into the world. Now, in the Orthodox tradition, there's great belief in the ritual mitzvot. I shared that in my Shabbat thought. When I grew up and I met my local Chabad rabbi, he said, if you do mitzvahs, if you light Shabbos candles, put on tefillin, do a variety of traditional mitzvahs, it conquers the darkness within. He didn't say it exactly that way, but that's what he meant. If you do physical mitzvahs, it will conquer the darkness within. I can tell you 100% it's just not true. I'm not saying it doesn't help, but it is not true. It is not efficacious. So as I considered this when I was a young person, I realized there's a will to do physical mitzvahs. It requires will. One thing that observable mitzvahs do is they take away your freedom, which is not a bad thing, which means when it's time to do the mitzvah, Shabbat, for example, you don't say, do I feel like it, do I not feel like it, or it's not a mitzvah. It's called an option. Once you take on the mitzvah of Shabbos, even the mitzvah of showing up and being part of our community on Shabbos morning, mitzvah means you have actually relinquished choice. Just the activity of relinquishing choice for something noble will help change your character. You get used to saying no to yourself, which in my mind is one of the most important functions of Shabbat. Any version of Shabbat is you don't ask yourself how you feel. You ask yourself, what time is it? And based on what time it is, here's what I have to do. You don't say whether, you say now that, here's what I will do. So there is a power to the ritual mitzvot, especially Shabbat, is that the duty takes precedence over any feeling. Anything going on in your life does not take precedence over the duty. It's a very, very powerful thing. The problem is, and I understood this when I was a young person, I would then meet many Orthodox Jews, as I wrote in my Shabbat thought, who are ritually punctilious, but scoundrels as human beings. Nachmanides called this keeping Torah. A naval is a scoundrel with a Torah license. Look at me, look how orthodox I am, look at all the mitzvahs that I do, but in their inner lives, in their interpersonal lives, they are not noble people, they act as scoundrels. And when I would talk about this to Orthodox rabbis that I later met, they would say, we know about it, we know it's a problem, and basically there's at least three kinds of wills you have to do as a human being to take Sfat Emet seriously. One is you have to have mitzvahs. Even if the mitzvah is the thou shalt not, no complaining, no criticizing, complaining, no harsh language. Just no. It's a al ta'aseh, thou shalt not. Of course, there are many thou shalts, but we'll start with the thou shalt not. It's a mitzvah. You don't think about it. You don't reason about it. It's just a mitzvah. Just do your duty. So the idea of a mitzvah is it stands, you might say, as something that is unmovable, like the boulder in the field. You cannot move the boulder. The boulder is staying there. You have to observe that there is actually a line, a boundary in your life. Now, just having the boundary in your life, on the ritual side won't do it. It has to be also a moral, spiritual boundary, which takes a different kind of will. Not only do I put the will, for example, for Shabbos in my life, here's how I will live. Again, I'm not saying Orthodox Shabbos, something identifiable that harnesses you to the spiritual and moral life. For it to be Jewish, it has to be identifiably Jewish, but I'm very liberal about that. Something identifiably Jewish, connected to our text, our traditions, that is harnessed to the moral and spiritual life. That's all that I would recommend. So it's not just not making fire on Shabbos, not driving your car, what I'll call the ritual types, but a ritual called Shabbat that has a moral and spiritual dimension. You need both. You need the will, the duty to fulfill the ritual part, fueled by two different wills, the will to be moral and the will to be spiritual. We need three wills. The will to observe this moment in time, the will to be moral, and the will to be spiritual. If they can be combined, mato, that's great. That's one thing that Shabbat can do for us. It's a ritual in time filled with things that we should not do and should do. Again, as you decide, as long as it's there. As a second dimension, you will meditate on the moral life, which means how not to cause harm to others from our perspective, especially harm through language and behavior that causes feeling and emotional harm to others. I think that's a core thing we need to study on Shabbos, every day of your life, but at least on Shabbos. And the third thing we have to commit ourselves to is the spiritual path, how to rid ourselves of the inner darkness within, and how to bring light to the world. I think those three things are the required things for human transformation. The decision to mark out time, especially, the decision to be a moral person, not cause harm to others, and there's again a panoply of Jewish wisdom on doing it, but it's not the list of wise practices. It's not saying no lashon hara, don't use language to hurt others. It's not the practice of acting in ways that diminish the dignity of the human being. We can list all those things. If you haven't decided, they will do no good because the darkness in with you will overcome them. So we have to make an active, constant, active will to bring the light into our interpersonal moral lives, and a constant active will to bring the light into the inner life. All that being said, the question is not whether, the question is how. Once you get to how, then life, of course, is consumed with mastering the skills. The skill I talked about last night that I want to mention very briefly now, I think it's worth mentioning. Excuse me for all the wind-up, but sometimes I feel I need to take the work that I'm doing, put them in the larger context, and that is the skill when we overcome anything in the inner life. Again, whether it's fear, anxiety, whatever it is, in my mind, there's something in us that is not able to experience some degree of sadness. For example, there are times when I've looked out at my life, and Meirav, through our entire professional lives, we stood on the precipice of, wow, we're really in trouble. This is not good. We got to rearrange things. We have to cut costs, raise money, and we felt ourselves fearing the future. I'm just being very, very personal and honest with you. We've gone through that more times than we'd like to think about. And then we realized the fear is the worst. It's not the problem to solve. It's not the money that has to be raised. It's not the cost, right? The main thing is the fear. We realize and by the way, the fear doesn't mean it's all going to work out. I would have people say to me, oh, don't be afraid, it's all going to work out. And I say, I know too much about life to know that everything's going to work out. I'm not getting rid of fear because I believe it's all going to work out. I'm getting rid of fear because this is not the most essential part of my life. The most essential part of my life is not something working out. It's great if things work out, but that's not the most essential part of my life. The most essential part of my life, for me, is losing my spiritual core. I'm more afraid of losing my spiritual core than anything. Just about anything in life, excluding the most egregious circumstances. Most things in life are sufferable if you have purpose, if you have meaning, and if you have an intact spiritual core. The worst thing that can happen to us, in my mind, is losing meaning, losing purpose, losing our spiritual core. When you're connected to your purpose, your meaning, your spiritual core, and you know how to maintain that, what are you afraid of? You're afraid of things in the outside world that you can't control? Then you're going to be afraid the rest of your life. So for me, fear is not lack of belief that it's all going to work out, because we don't know if it's all going to work out. For me, fear is I've lost a sense of the most important thing that nothing in the outside world can take away of me. It doesn't matter my anxiety. It doesn't matter my fear, my guilt, my shame, my attachment to the outside world, even my attachment to my inner life world. If I have deep, deep faith and trust in my spiritual core, if I work constantly to strengthen my spiritual core, whatever I'm faced with, again, whatever disruptions of the inner life are there, the spiritual core connected to the light and the goodness, we can say from God or not. I don't know exactly where it's from, but I know I have it. Everything is manageable if one continuously and strongly attaches oneself to one sense of meaning, purpose, and one's spiritual core, which, for me is filled with the love, light, and blessings from the divine. For me, this is, as it were, the necessary context, both the prior part on decision and this part here. This is a prior context for all spiritual work. And I think if this is all intact, our spiritual work, our spiritual and moral work has a much greater likelihood of success. And my hope for all of you as we take this little bit of our first lines of our Torah portion, where the divine says, take the raw stuff, take the olives, beat them down to that they are a liquid, put them in the menorah, light it, so you will have a ner tamid, a constant lamp in your life. The Proverbs goes on to add, ner mitzvah, the lamp is actually the mitzvah, and the Torah is or. When you start to live inside that world, all of this work becomes understandable, all this work becomes manageable, and I think all this work is going to meet to some degree with great success in your inner life search.